Hi everybody, Fred the Pirate here, and this is a review of Young Justice Season 2, Episode 17, entitled The Hunt. Alright, so the summary for this week's episode is Lex sends his new team of superpowered teenagers on a mission to rescue Young Justice. So, the summary says, alright, Young Justice, gives Static, Eduardo, Ty, and Asami, a boom tube thing so that they can go to the war world and rescue, Superboy and the other members. And while this is also happening, Arsenal is still on the run from the Reach like he was in episode 15. So we're kind of back to that, to the implications of the War World episode. So overall, so that was pretty much what happens this week episode. The team gets sent to the War World. Arsenal is still trying to evade capture, and they eventually end up teaming up and helping each other out, and everybody ends up getting rescued with the assistance of Deathstroke, although he's just there to get the crystal on the behalf of the light. So that's pretty much what happened in this week's episode, and I have to say, overall, it was a nice episode. A lot happened. I think especially we're kind of moving more towards, with the Justice League along with the Young Justice team and the Light working together against the Reach. And I think in this episode, a lot of things didn't work out for the Reach like they have been. I think for so many episodes, they have just so frustratingly been so successful and so suave about it. But I think with the teams working together, that, this is really throwing, a wrench in their plans. And that's definitely very awesome. So that's pretty much what happened. The fight scenes were really nice. The one thing I would have liked to see is that during the episode, Arsenal releases Mongol and he fights Black Beetle, and I kind of would have liked to see more of that fight because they are both such heavy hitters. But in the episode, that's kind of used as a diversion for the teams to get out of there. Another moment in the show that I really liked is when the Reach ambassador is on G. Gordon Godfrey's news show, and so far throughout the series, G. Gordon has just spent so much of the series giving the Justice League shit about stuff and just pretty much just praising the Reach. But it was nice to, he called the Reach out, and he pointed out, you lied to us. And, and I'm glad that was addressed, and I'm glad that Godfrey addressed it, and it's you lied, and I'm going to call you out on it. It's I was cool with you when you were honest with us, but it's I'm not going to let you get by with stuff. And that was really awesome because, earlier in the series, especially the season, it's kind of been annoying, how he just keeps giving the Justice League so much shit. And admittedly, they kind of deserve it. He does point stuff out. A lot of things happen. And, I don't know if it's necessarily the Justice League's fault, but it's they're just always there to deal with that. And it kind of just seems you guys are supposed to be protecting us, but yet all these shenanigans happen. And I think with this episode, it was nice that he called out the Reach. It's you lied. And that was really, really awesome. Towards the end of the episode, after everybody got rescued, Arsenal ended up getting, first, Nightwing invited Static and Ed and Ty and Asami to the Young Justice team. But then at the same time, you know, Bumblebee mentioned, you know, if Arsenal wasn't so reckless with the opening the airlock, she mentioned, you know, you opened an airlock in the middle of the thing, you almost killed us all, and that's the reason why we got captured. Like, we wouldn't have gotten captured if you wouldn't have done that. I mean, they probably still would have, but like he definitely guaranteed the capture of the rest of that team just so he could save his ass. And he mentions like, well, if I wouldn't have done that, you know, you wouldn't have gotten caught, and like, you know, you wouldn't have gotten rescued at all. So it's like, you should be thanking me. And then Nightwing responds like, yeah, thanks, because, you know, I do recognize that you know, you did good in that aspect and you saved them, but he ends up getting kicked off the team. And the thing is, given what I know about him from the comics, I believe he, like Arsenal, is based off of the fact that in the comics, Roy Harper's character eventually becomes a villain. You know, that he starts out as going from Speedy, and then he becomes Red Arrow, and then eventually in the comics, I know he loses his arm and he becomes Arsenal. And I think to deal with those two storylines in the TV show, they made the clone of Roy, and he becomes Red Arrow, and he hooks up with Cheshire, and they have a baby, and all that stuff happens in the comics. And then later on, I guess this really isn't spoilery because I don't know. I think because the series is getting canceled, it's probably not much of a spoiler. But in the comics, Roy's child dies. So Leon, his daughter with Cheshire, dies. And then eventually, in the comics, Roy is obviously really well known for having a problem with drugs. I think he was a heroin addict for a while, and then he eventually got clean, and that's how he became hooked up with Cheshire. But then eventually, after Leon dies, you know, he goes back to drugs. He loses his arm, and he becomes a villain, and he gets the mechanical arm, and he becomes Arsenal. So I think to deal with that in the show, they made Clone Roy to become Red Arrow and do the Cheshire stuff, and then they made original Roy lose his arm and become Arsenal. So they did that. And so that's, and I think especially because Arsenal's character is a villain in the series, I think if the series would have lasted long enough and not been canceled, he eventually probably would have become a villain in the series like he does in the comics. And I think because he becomes a villain, or at least he would have, it kind of makes sense why he's reckless and he's very self-serving. Like, he's definitely justified in that, but like, it's understandable. Like, he's not, you know, an asshole for no reason, but like, he is very self-centered, and he's like, Roy as Arsenal thinks about Roy, and that's like, that is what he's interested in. And like, and those are qualities that kind of certainly lead themselves to villainy. And I think it kind of makes sense. Like, you know, I agree definitely with what Dick did, because he's not a team player. He's just not. Like, he can do stuff, but he's just so reckless. And I think I mentioned in my review for the episode where they infiltrate the LexCorp farms, like, he ends up almost getting them killed for a childish vendetta. Like, he ends up blowing the place up and blowing their cover and almost getting them killed, you know, just so he can fuck with Lex for a couple minutes. And it's like, and that shit just doesn't fly. Like, he's very effective and he's very strong, but he's not a team player, and he's really reckless about stuff. And I think because of that, obviously, Static and Ed and Ty and Asami, they end up choosing not to go with the team, and then they end up going back to their house using a boom tube, and Lex ends up congratulating them, and Arsenal points out the fact that Lex is losing them and is using them to do what he wants. And so towards the end of that, they decide to cut their ties, not just with the team, but with Lex. And it's like, we're doing our own shit. Which that was really interesting. I think, so that was definitely a really interesting episode. As far as what's going to happen, I think, there might be a good possibility that the Young Justice, the Justice League, and the Light will team up to fight the Reach in some way. I'm kind of still sticking to that hypothesis. I don't know how likely it is. I think that would certainly be cool. So obviously that's going to happen, and that'll probably happen soon. And as far as Arsenal and the team, I guess I imagine for the remainder of the series, they'll probably work together. I think if the series wouldn't have been canceled and it would have gone on long enough, that, like I said, I think Arsenal will part ways with them, or he would have. He might still do it in the remaining episodes, although that's slim. But they would have parted ways. Virgil and Ed and Ty and Asami would have eventually joined the team. I think Jaime would have been rescued from the Reach. And I think eventually, given enough time, Arsenal would have become a villain, because he becomes a villain in the comics, so that would have happened. It would have been really interesting to see that. Like, I mean, it's understandable why, because he's really reckless, and he's, he just doesn't care about other people. I mean, he does care about other people, but, like, he cares about himself a lot more than he cares about other people. And I think honestly, I'm not super familiar with the comics, but I'm under the impression that in the series that he's a mercenary in a similar vein to Deathstroke is. And I imagine in the show, I think he probably becomes a villain more so that he can be like a soldier of fortune, which is, a mercenary, which I think that's probably what would end up happening in the series, that he'd become a mercenary because it'd be profitable. And that he'd kind of be like a villain in that regard. So I guess maybe he'd be more like I guess he'd be on the verge, on the thin line from being like an anti-hero to just a villain. Like he'd be like in that really thin line, which that would have been cool to watch. Obviously that's not going to happen. Like, it still would have been cool to see it, but obviously it's not going to happen. The animation for this episode was wonderful as always. And it was nice to see Virgil and Ty and Ed and Asami getting to really, they're mastering their powers and getting to use them more, so that was definitely cool. And it was cool seeing Arsenal in action. He's definitely reckless, but it's fun to see him in action. So with that said, I'm definitely looking forward to next week's episode. Definitely looking forward to that. Well, anyways, this has been a review for Young Justice Season 2, Episode 17, entitled The Hunt. And I'll see you guys again next time. So make sure to comment, rate, and subscribe, and tell me about what you guys think, and also tell me what you guys would have liked to see in the series had it not been canceled. Because obviously I think we all know that there was just so much that could have happened. So, well, I'll see you guys again, and it's been awesome.